But I think what's very critical is that this report shows that Asia has a very multifaceted and complex volunteering sector. We're not surprised, actually. The enormous growth in the recent years has really been the result, I think, of two very large trends. One has been the expansion of global civil society, and the other is the growth of international institutes of cooperation in addition to these NGOs that was really launched in the mid-20th century by that great experiment of the UN. And in the interim years, volunteer service has come to be an important global social institution. I think we can't underestimate that contribution that international volunteering has made, and I'll return to that in just a couple of seconds. So I'll talk about four things. One is the issue of Asia to Asia volunteering and directionality in international volunteering. The second is reciprocity, inclusion, and access in international volunteering. The third is shifting demographics and rising affluence in Asia and the implications of that for international volunteering. And as a researcher, I'm sorry, I have to talk about research. And I will conclude on that note. First, with respect to Asia volunteering, I think these results show a very strong desire to build a geographic and cultural proximity, a regional project of international volunteering. And I think, we've seen this around the world. We've seen it certainly in Europe. The initiator of this, Latin America, Africa, in North America. It's a question, I think, for all IVCOs in terms of the parallel growth of these regional groups that are interacting in volunteering, but also the global kinds of volunteering that goes on and global understanding that's built. And I think this question was also brought up in the climate change paper as we think about our carbon footprint and how far we're going to go to volunteer. That maybe one of the first steps is a regional kind of interaction followed possibly by a global volunteering. A very interesting and related question is the role of diaspora in IVS. This is not just a discussion that's happening in the Asia region. Erin Terrazas at the Migration Policy Institute just had issued a paper, Diaspora Volunteers in Global Development, if you haven't seen, a very interesting paper. And he basically identifies two clusters of diaspora volunteers. One is the highly skilled volunteer who returns to the ancestral home to support development efforts. And the other, a very important one that's dear to my heart, is youth volunteers from the diaspora who return to their ancestral communities for a period of community-based volunteering. A very interesting, I think, development opportunity for young people. So turning a bit to the question of reciprocity, access, and inclusion, UNV and VSO have been thinking about these issues for a long time. Many of you in the room have really set the stage for changing the historical pattern of north to south volunteering from developed to, quote, less developed countries. And we've seen a real change in perspective about that, as I say, thanks to the work of many of you in the room. Research is fairly clear about the benefits of international volunteering to the volunteers. Over and over again, we hear about how much young people in particular are transformed by the experience of international volunteering. The benefits to host communities are, the research is much less strong. We have a lot of work to do in this area. But certainly the benefits would suggest that access and inclusion to the volunteer experience is really important. And it's not just access and inclusion by certain countries, it's also within countries. So do our Do our young people who have less resources have the capacity and the opportunity to serve overseas? I think very often we have seen this as a middle and upper income phenomenon rather than a lower income phenomenon. And I won't wade into the discussion of remuneration and what the definition of volunteering is, but I think from a pragmatic point of view, I think we can say that the upfront costs of international volunteering prevent less privileged people from volunteering. And so that happens within countries and across countries, something that's very critical. Moving on to the sort of next question, I think, is the pathways that Caroline speaks about. The pathways to volunteering for everyone, if we think about an inclusionary perspective, and to consider how volunteering can be structured into educational, social, economic, and political institutions in countries so that make service almost an inevitable part of becoming a citizen of that country and then a citizen of the world. So how do we think about volunteering not as a do you do domestic or do you do international, but how do you become a volunteer in your lifetime, whether that is at your local community, in your nation, across nations. So it's not just pathways to volunteering, but also who among the population is actually volunteering. So one of the points that Caroline pointed out is the increased numbers of people who are older who are volunteering. And I would suggest that maybe we should really think about this as volunteering across the life course. The Asia 360 magazine we all had in our packets, there was an article in there about fertility rates, which are going down in all countries. This is a particular issue, I know, in Asia. We need to be thinking about aging, perhaps from the perspective, we at Center for Social Development talk about the question of productive aging. And maybe volunteering opportunities is one of the aspects of productive aging. We know a lot about this transformative experience of youth in volunteering. We know much, much less about older volunteers, the effects, and how to structure that. So is it online volunteering that really includes older volunteers? Are there other ways to structure volunteering so that it works for them and is helpful to host communities? The other issue that Caroline raised is growing and rising affluence, which means that more and more people can volunteer. It also means shifting priorities. We saw in the research for development donors in including international volunteers in their program. I think there was an example from Vietnam about a shift in priorities. So I think this raises many questions for Asia and for other countries, and I think a lot of questions about reciprocity, because certainly even within very affluent countries, my own country I can speak of, in the aftermath of the Hurricane Katrina, we saw international volunteers come and be very effective participants in the rebuilding of the southern United States after that calamity. I think I won't speak because Caroline has spoken already about internet technology and disaster planning, but let me finish with just a few words about research. And I've had some discussions with some of you, quite interesting, and perhaps these will be provocative comments. I hope so. We can have a good discussion. I see good research as a partnership with the field. We actually cannot do research without the practitioners, people in organizations like yours. You help us to ask good questions, and you provide the way to actually ask the questions in the research process. But we do have to talk about, I think, rigorous research, including impacts on host communities, on volunteers, and on sending communities. I know there's disagreement on this and the extent to which we should emphasize this, but I think there are two really key reasons why this is important. One is the explosion in international volunteering that we've all talked about and talk about in our discussions. NGOs, faith-based, government-sponsored, public-private partnerships, and now the entrance of a very significant for-profit sector in international volunteering. We have short-term, we have long-term volunteers. We must understand what they do and what the results are. I think that there's unique contributions that international volunteering makes to development. We need to be clear about what those are and how it fits in. And moving back to what I mentioned earlier as international volunteering as an emerging social institution, I think everyone in this room understands the contribution, the uniqueness, the importance of it. But I'm not sure that all policymakers do. I think they think it's a nice, but it's a kind of sideline activity. And so I think that Forum and the research that you have sponsored, the research that you encourage in your own organizations, provides a way to really focus on this growing global institution and bringing it to light. And I congratulate you for actually spending your time and resources on encouraging this. And I look forward to our further discussions. Thank you.